I watched my son tell a security guard to throw me in the trash, and I didn't say a word because I wanted to see exactly how much his soul cost. It was a Tuesday morning in April 2026, a day where the sun was bright, but the shadows in the lobby of Vance Enterprises were long and cold. I stood there, a small woman of 65 years, feeling the weight of my 155 centimeters and 53 kilograms, like a burden I had carried for too long. The lobby was a cathedral of cold luxury, gray marble floors polished to a mirror shine, and glass walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. My Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, looked almost sickly under the clinical blue-white glare of the overhead LEDs, and the Da Han Hop Tien Dao combination oily skin on my forehead was tight with the cold sweat of a mother's nervous hope. I was holding a simple plastic Tupperware container, warm against my palms. Inside was beef stew, the kind I used to make for Nathaniel when he was a boy, the kind he used to say smelled like home. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The receptionist didn't look at me. She was young, her nails long, and painted a sharp metallic silver. She looked at my modest floral blouse and my sensible shoes and saw an obstacle. "I'm here to see Nathaniel. I'm his mother," I said. My voice was a low, slow murmur, fragmented by the sudden realization that I felt like a trespasser in a building I had technically provided for. The elevator doors chimed, a sound like a falling coin. Nathaniel stepped out, surrounded by a phalanx of men in bespoke navy suits. He was the sun of this universe, radiating materialistic success. His Rolex caught the light as he gestured wildly, his voice booming with delusions of power as he discussed a merger. He saw me. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the CEO slipped, and I saw my son. Then his eyes turned into chips of flint. He saw the Tupperware. He saw the woman who had scrubbed floors so he could walk on marble, and he felt ashamed. "Nathaniel, I brought you some dinner. You've been working so late, and I thought—" "Security," he snapped, his voice cutting through my sentence like a guillotine. He didn't stop walking. He didn't even look me in the eye. "There is an outsider in the lobby bothering me for a handout. Please escort her out immediately. This is a corporate headquarters, not a charity ward." The punch hit me so hard, I felt my breath hitch in my throat. An outsider. A handout. The security guard, a man with a thick neck and a tired face, took my arm. "Come on, lady. You heard the boss. Let's go." I was pushed through the revolving doors, back out into the street. I watched through the glass as another staff member took my Tupperware container, the beef stew I had simmered for 4 hours, and dropped it into a sleek, chrome trash bin near the reception desk. Nathaniel didn't look back. He was already laughing at a joke made by one of his investors. So this is how they repay me? I stood on the sidewalk, the wind whipping my silver hair across my face. My heart felt like a fragmented piece of glass, sharp and jagged in my chest. Did they really think I had become that senile? Did Nathaniel truly believe that I was just a utility that had outlived its function? And he had spent 30 years enjoying the shade of the tree I had planted, and now he wanted to chop it down because it clashed with his new aesthetic. The choking sorrow began to harden into something else, something cold, something clear-headed. I looked up at the V logo emblazoned on the top of the skyscraper. Nathaniel thought he was the master of this kingdom. He thought he had earned every floor, every pane of glass, and every suit. He had forgotten the ledger of blood that paid for his education. He had forgotten the sandpaper hands that held him when he was small. I didn't go home to cry. I walked 2 blocks down to a small, cramped office with a neon sign that read pristine services, janitorial, and maintenance. The man behind the desk looked at my fair, cool skin and my steady eyes. "You looking for work, lady?" "I am," I said. My voice was no longer fragmented. It was sharpening. "I hear you have the contract for Vance Enterprises." "We do. Hard work, night shift. Most people don't last a week." "I'm hardworking," I replied, a flash of quiet wisdom behind my gaze. "And I'm very good at cleaning up messes." I signed the papers as Margaret Smith. I didn't want him to see his mother. I wanted him to see the outsider he had created. I wanted to see the man he was when he thought no one was watching. I wanted to see the invisible ones who kept his world spinning while he sat in his throne. As I walked out with my new navy blue polyester uniform folded under my arm, I felt a strange, terrifying freedom. The invisible bloodline had been severed by his hand. Now, I would show him that the most dangerous person in the building isn't the competitor in the boardroom. It's the woman holding the mop. My kindness was never a doormat for you to wipe your feet on, Nathaniel. It was a bridge, and you just tried to burn it while I was still standing on it. The greatest mistake the powerful make is believing that those who serve them are beneath them. They forget that a building is only as strong as the dirt it sits upon. When we protect our children from the struggle, we often inadvertently rob them of their humanity. Nathaniel didn't just reject a meal. He rejected the very history that allowed him to exist. But history has a way of repeating itself, especially for those who refuse to read the ledger. The navy blue polyester felt like a shroud. It was stiff, smelling of industrial starch and the faint metallic tang of the locker room where I had traded my dignity for a plastic name tag that read, Employee 402. I stood in the basement of Vance Enterprises looking at my reflection in a cracked mirror. My Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, seemed to absorb the sickly green hue of the fluorescent lights, making me look like a subterranean creature. I was 65 years old, a woman of 155 centimeters and 53 kilograms, and the industrial mop in my hand felt like a lead weight. My Da Han Hop Tien Dao, combination oily skin, was already slick with a fine sheen of perspiration. Not from the heat. The building was kept at a constant expensive chill, but from the sheer, choking sorrow of what I was about to do. I didn't return to this building to beg. I returned to witness. I wanted to see the man my son had become when he thought the world was only populated by his equals. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was silent, a smooth ascent into a realm of cold luxury. When the doors opened, I wasn't the mother who brought beef stew. I was a shadow. I was the utility Nathaniel had ordered to be managed. I began my shift on the 42nd floor, moving with the low, slow rhythm of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to be invisible. I pushed the heavy cart down the hallway, the rubber wheels squeaking against the gray marble. Every squeak felt like a scream in the silence of the after-hours office. I emptied bins filled with discarded memos and half-eaten gourmet salads, and I polished glass walls that held no fingerprints but my own. My sandpaper hands, rough and calloused from decades of the hardworking life I'd led to give Nathaniel his start, gripped the spray bottle until my knuckles turned white. So this is how they repay me, I thought, my breath hitching as I approached the CEO's suite. Nathaniel was still there. Through the glass, I saw him sitting behind a desk that cost more than my first 3 cars. He was staring at a monitor, his brow furrowed in that same way it used to when he struggled with long division. For a moment, the self-sacrificing mother in me wanted to walk in, rub his shoulders, and tell him to come home. But then the doors opened, and a group of young executives walked in, their voices loud and full of delusions of power. Still at it, Vance, one of them laughed, tossing a crumpled coffee cup toward my bin. It missed, rolling across the floor I had just buffed. Nathaniel didn't look up. The hustle never sleeps, Marcus. Unlike our service staff, apparently. He gestured vaguely toward me without looking. Hey, you, 402. You missed a spot near the credenza. I froze. I was standing less than 5 feet from him. My silver hair was tucked under a cap, but my eyes, the same eyes he had looked into every morning for 18 years, were fixed on his face. I waited for the spark of recognition. I waited for the shame. Instead, he looked directly at me and saw a tool. Did you hear me? He snapped, his voice dripping with a disrespectful impatience. The credenza, and make it quick. We have a midnight briefing. One of the younger men squinted at me. Wait, is that the lady from the lobby? In the one you called an outsider? Nathaniel let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. Probably. They all look the same in those blue suits, don't they? Just another ghost in the machine. Honestly, Marcus, if you spend your time memorizing the faces of the janitors, you'll never have time to memorize the market caps. The choking sorrow in my chest hardened. It turned into a cold, clinical observation. I walked to the credenza. I knelt on the cold marble. I began to scrub. As I worked, the low, slow memories of the ledger of blood began to play in my mind. I remembered the nights I spent in the pharmaceutical vats, the caustic fumes burning my lungs so he could have the aesthetic life he craved. I remembered the plasma center, the way the needle felt like a permanent resident in my arm. I had sold my very life force so he wouldn't have to know the scent of ammonia. And here I was, inhaling it once again, while he used me as a punchline for his materialistic friends. Did they really think I had become that senile? Did he truly believe that because I wore polyester, I had lost the quiet wisdom that allowed me to buy the very land this building sat upon? I didn't say a word. I finished the spot. I stood up, my joints aching with a rhythmic throb that matched the ticking of the clock on the wall. I pushed my cart out of the room, the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with the bleach on my hands. Nathaniel didn't look back. He was already on to the next deal, the next million, the next brick in his glass fortress. He thought he had exorcised his complicated past by throwing me out of the lobby. He didn't realize that by making me a ghost, he had given me the power to haunt him. I was no longer just his mother. I was employee 402. And from the darkness of the night shift, I was going to audit the soul of the man I had raised. There is a strange, terrifying freedom in being overlooked. When the world decides you are invisible, it stops performing for you. It shows you its true, ugly face. I spent my life protecting Nathaniel from the dirt, only to realize that by doing so, I had made him a man who couldn't see the person standing in it. We think we are building our children's futures with our sacrifices, but sometimes we are only building their arrogance. True dignity isn't found in the suit you wear. It's found in the hands that keep the world clean. My son thinks he is the master of this tower, but he has forgotten that every tower is built on the ground. And the ground is mine. The scent of industrial-grade ammonia is a ghost that never truly leaves your lungs once it takes up residence. As I knelt on the cold marble floor of the executive restroom, the fumes triggered a phantom itch deep in my chest, a rhythmic, low, slow throb that echoed the graveyard shifts of 1998. My sandpaper hands, gnarled and stiff, gripped the scrub brush as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to the earth. To understand why the outsider comment felt like a serrated blade in my marrow, you have to look at the ledger of blood I signed 30 years ago. I remember the winter of 1996. Thomas had been gone for only 6 months, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a 10-year-old boy who had just started to notice that his shoes didn't have the right logo. I was barely 53 kilograms then, a wisp of a woman trying to hold back a hurricane with a moth-eaten umbrella. I didn't have a degree. I had a high school diploma and a 155-centimeter frame that looked like it would snap in a stiff breeze. But I had a self-sacrificing heart that wouldn't let Nathaniel feel the frost of poverty. I remember the plasma center in Bridgeport. It was a sterile, fluorescent-lit purgatory that smelled of ozone and desperation. I sat in a high-backed plastic chair, my Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, looking like translucent parchment under the flickering lights. I watched the thick needle slide into the crook of my arm, a bite that never quite healed. I watched my own life force, that straw-colored liquid, swirl into the collection bottle twice a week for 3 years. $40 a pop. $40 for the graphing calculator he needed. $40 for the sneakers that kept him from being bullied. Every time the machine hummed, I felt a little more of my quiet wisdom being drained away, replaced by a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. I wore long sleeves even in the humid Connecticut summers to hide the bruises on my arms, telling him the marks were just the cost of working hard. So this is how they repay me? The question hissed in my mind as I scrubbed a stubborn scuff mark Nathaniel had left near his private vanity. He had stood here just an hour ago, adjusting his $5,000 tie, looking at his reflection with materialistic pride. He didn't see the woman behind him emptying his trash. He didn't see the sandpaper hands that used to guide his own through his alphabet. Then came the pharmaceutical vats. To move us from that cramped apartment into a house near a better school district, I took the graveyard shift at a local chemical plant. I was the one they sent into the massive stainless steel tanks to scrub the residue of caustic compounds. The fumes were so thick they felt like a physical weight in my throat. The chemicals would seep through the heavy rubber gloves, aggravating my Da Han Hop Tien Dao, combination oily skin, until my face and neck were a map of weeping red welts. My skin would burn for days, a fire that no cream could quench. I did it so he could walk through the world with delusions of power, never knowing the scent of bleach or the taste of iron in the back of his throat. I turned my body into a machine, a utility, a light bulb that refused to burn out. And now I sat on the floor of the building I technically owned, listening to him tell his junior associates that people were disposable. "People are like light bulbs, Miller," his voice echoed from the hallway, dripping with a disrespectful arrogance. "When they burn out, you unscrew them and throw them away. You don't try to fix them." I stopped scrubbing. I felt the choking sorrow in my chest begin to crystallize into a cold, clear-headed resolve. Did they really think I had become that senile? Did he truly believe that because I had become invisible in my navy blue polyester, I had lost the capacity to remember the debt he owed? He had spent his entire life enjoying the aesthetic of success, forgetting that the foundation was built on the chemical burns and the bruised arms of a mother he now called an outsider. He saw the glass tower. He forgot the earth. He saw the CEO. He forgot the ghost. I looked at my reflection in the polished chrome of the towel rack. My Da Trang Lan was etched with the lines of 30 years of hardworking sacrifice, but my eyes were full of a quiet wisdom that was finally ready to speak. The ledger of blood was full, Nathaniel. And tonight I realized that the light bulb you think is burned out is actually the one that's going to set your entire glass house on fire. I stood up, my joints clicking in the silence of the executive suite. I didn't feel like a maid anymore. I felt like an auditor, and I was about to collect every single cent of the interest you've forgotten to pay. Taught the price of the unseen. We live in a world that confuses utility with worth. We think that the hands that hold the pen are more valuable than the hands that hold the mop, forgetting that without the mop, the office becomes a tomb of its own filth. My son's materialistic success blinded him to the most basic truth. Every empire is built on the broken backs of the invisible ones. When we stop seeing our elders, we stop seeing our own history. And when we lose our history, we lose our soul. I sacrificed my health to give him a future, but in doing so, I accidentally gave him the arrogance to believe he didn't need a past. True quiet wisdom comes from realizing that dignity isn't something given to you by a title. It's something you earn through the grit of your character. My sandpaper hands are a badge of honor. His polished ones are a symptom of a hollow heart. My kindness was a choice, not a mandate. And as I've learned, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who has been watching, listening, and waiting for the right moment to remind you who actually owns the floor you're standing on. The boardroom of Vance Enterprises felt less like a meeting space and more like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of materialistic excess. It was 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, the tail end of my double shift. I was alone, a small figure of 155 centimeters and 53 kilograms, buffing the 30-foot mahogany table until the grain glowed like bottled honey. My sandpaper hands, calloused and stiff, moved in rhythmic circles. My Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, was pale and drawn under the dim security lights, and my Da Han Hop Tien Dao, combination oily skin, was slick with the residue of 12 hours of labor. I was finishing the floor near the head of the table when the heavy glass doors hissed open. The cold luxury of the room was suddenly invaded by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of expensive Italian leather and the aggressive scent of sandalwood cologne. Nathaniel walked in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 6 men, international investors, the strangers who held the keys to the next phase of his delusions of power. He was wearing a navy pinstripe suit that probably cost more than the van I used to live in when he was a toddler. He looked magnificent, polished, and utterly hollow. I didn't stop my work. I kept my head down, my navy polyester uniform a dark blot against the pristine marble. I moved the buffing machine with the low, slow gait of a woman who had learned that the best way to survive in this building was to be mistaken for the furniture. "Wait," Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through the quiet morning air like a jagged piece of metal. The group stopped. I felt his shadow fall over me, cold and oppressive. He didn't look at my face. He didn't look at the silver hair escaping from my cap. He looked at a tiny microscopic smudge of wax near the base of the table, a smudge I was about to address. "Look at this," Nathaniel said, turning to the lead investor, a man with cold gray eyes. He pointed at the floor near my feet. "This, gentleman, is the invisible rot in corporate culture. This is why we have a turnover problem with our service providers. They're lazy. They're old. They lack the vision for a pristine environment that reflects our brand." The choking sorrow rose in my chest, thick as the floor wax I was breathing. I felt the ledger of blood thrumming in my veins. My son was using me as a prop. A negative example of standards to impress men who didn't know his name 5 years ago. "You?" he barked, tapping his foot against the buffer. "What's your name?" I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on his reflection in the marble. I made my voice a fragmented whisper, a thin, fragile thread of sound. "Employee 402, sir." "Well, 402, you're an embarrassment to this wing," Nathaniel sneered, his voice dripping with a disrespectful arrogance that made the investors shift uncomfortably. "You move like a snail. You're exactly the kind of outsider that brings down the value of a high-end corporate culture. You don't belong in this boardroom. You belong in a basement, hidden away where the light doesn't reveal your incompetence." One of the investors, an older man from London, looked at me with a flicker of genuine pity. "Surely, Nathaniel, it's just a smudge. The lady looks exhausted." Nathaniel laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Don't feel bad for her, Arthur. In this company, we don't tolerate mediocrity. Even the invisible ones must be perfect. She should be grateful to be breathing the filtered air in this lobby, let alone the executive wing. It's a charity that she's even employed at her age." "So this is how they repay me?" The thought crystallized in my mind with a clear-headed intensity that burned away the hurt. I looked at the floor I was scrubbing. I looked at his reflection. He was standing on 3 acres of prime real estate. He was standing on the hidden asset I had guarded with my life while I sold my plasma to buy him bread. He was standing on my soil, calling me a snail. Did they really think I had become that senile? Did he truly believe that because I had tucked my dignity into a polyester pocket, I had lost the quiet wisdom to know that I held the lease to his very throne? Nathaniel thought he was the master of the strangers. He thought he was the king of the glass cathedral. He didn't realize that the snail beneath his feet was the only thing keeping the ground from swallowing him whole. "I'm sorry, sir," I whispered, the fragmented voice masking the strategic intelligence that was already calculating the date of the lease renewal. "I'll be more perfect next time." "There won't be a next time for you in this room," Nathaniel said, turning back to his guests. "Let's move to the lounge. The air is stagnant here." As they walked away, their laughter echoing off the glass, I stood up. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt like the earth itself, silent, patient, and absolutely immovable. I pulled a small, worn piece of paper from my pocket. It wasn't a cleaning schedule. It was the original deed from 1991, signed in Thomas's shaky hand and my own. The clash was coming, Nathaniel. You called me an outsider in your kingdom, never realizing that you are just a guest on my land. And the lease is up, my son. The lease is almost up. The mirror of the floor. We often believe that the higher we climb, the more we can see. But the truth is, the higher you go in a glass tower, the more you lose sight of the ground that supports you. My son looked at the floor and saw a smudge. He didn't see the foundation. He looked at an old woman and saw a utility. He didn't see the source. True, quiet wisdom understands that the most powerful people are often the ones you don't notice. The world is built by the invisible ones, the ones who scrub the grout, empty the bins, and sell their blood to keep the lights on. When you stop seeing them, you stop seeing reality. Nathaniel thinks he owns the view. He's forgotten that I own the dirt. And in the end, the dirt always wins. The locker room of the janitorial staff was located in the sub-basement, a place where the air conditioning didn't quite reach, and the walls hummed with the industrial vibration of the building's heart. I sat on a dented metal bench, my 155-centimeter frame hunched over, staring at my sandpaper hands. They were stained with the gray residue of industrial floor wax, the skin cracked and parched. But beneath the grime, hidden in the inner pocket of my navy polyester uniform, pressed against my ribs, was a document that weighed more than the entire glass tower above me. It was the ledger of the earth. To Nathaniel, this building was a testament to his own brilliance, a 30-story monument to his materialistic ambition. He looked at the glass and saw his own reflection. He looked at the marble and saw his status. But he never looked at the dirt. He never looked at the soil upon which his throne was built. If he had, he might have remembered the woman who bought it. 30 years ago, before the Vance name was etched in chrome, my husband Thomas was a man of quiet wisdom and very few words. We lived in a shack on the edge of the city, surrounded by scrub brush and red clay. People laughed when Thomas spent every cent of our meager savings, money I had earned scrubbing hospital floors, to buy 3 acres of worthless wasteland. They didn't see the city's master plan. Thomas did. When he died in 1996, the world expected me to sell that dirt to pay for his funeral. They expected the haggard widow to liquidate her only asset just to keep the lights on. But I remembered Thomas's eyes. I remembered the way he touched the soil and whispered, "This is the anchor, Margaret. Never let go of the anchor." So I sold my plasma instead. I worked 3 jobs. I became self-sacrificing to the point of invisibility. I let the city grow around me. I watched the skyscrapers march toward my 3 acres like a slow-moving army. 10 years ago, when the developers came knocking, I didn't sell. I was hardworking enough to know that selling is a one-time gain, but owning is a lifetime of power. I negotiated a life estate ground lease through a faceless entity I named the Margaret Vance Trust. I allowed Vance Enterprises to build their headquarters here, but I retained ownership of the ground. Every quarter, a wire transfer moved from Nathaniel's corporate accounts into that trust. To him, it was a ghost on a spreadsheet, a nameless, soulless landlord he had never met. and he was too busy with his delusions of power to realize that the landlord was the woman he had just called a snail. I pulled the deed out now, the paper yellowed and smelling of old cedar, and the damp basement of our first home. My Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, looked ghostly in the flickering fluorescent light, and my Da Hon Hop Tien Dao, combination oily skin, was tight with a cold, clear-headed resolve. Did he really think I had become that senile? Did he truly believe that my quiet wisdom had evaporated into the bleach I used to clean his executive toilets? The lease for the land beneath Vance Enterprises is set to expire on May 1st, 2026. According to the contract I signed with my own sandpaper hands, there is no automatic renewal, and the tenant must meet with the principal of the trust in person to negotiate the new terms. Nathaniel thinks he is preparing for a battle with a Wall Street shark. He thinks he is going to face a man in a $10,000 suit who wants to squeeze him for more liquidity. He doesn't realize he is going to face the outsider he threw out of his lobby. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal of the deed. I felt the ledger of blood pulsing in my fingertips. Nathaniel has spent his life trying to escape the dirt of his upbringing. He wanted the aesthetic of the elite, the cold luxury of a man who was born at the top. He forgot that the higher the tower, the more it relies on the stability of the ground. I stood up, my joints clicking in the humid sub-basement air. I was no longer just employee 402. I was the earth beneath his feet. I was the foundation he had forgotten to respect. So this is how they repay me? By mocking my age and my labor while I hold the very lease to their existence? I tucked the deed back into my pocket. The low, slow voice of my grief was gone, replaced by a sharp, decisive rhythm. Tomorrow is the meeting. Tomorrow the snail walks into the boardroom not to buff the floors, but to claim them. Nathaniel thinks he owns the sky. He's about to find out who owns the world. The anchor of the soul. In a world obsessed with the aesthetic of the new, we often forget the value of the old. We think that progress means erasing the past, that success means standing on the shoulders of those we've taught ourselves to ignore. But true, quiet wisdom understands that every glass tower is a guest on the earth's property. My son's materialistic pride blinded him to the source of his own strength. He mistook my silence for a lack of content, my labor for a lack of intelligence. But the earth does not shout. It simply waits. It supports you until it decides not to. I am the earth, and I am tired of the weight of an ungrateful king. The hidden asset of a life isn't always gold or silver. Sometimes it's the sheer, stubborn refusal to be moved. I held on to the dirt when I had nothing else, and now the dirt is the only thing that can save him or destroy him. The sub-basement janitor's closet smelled of lemon-scented bleach and old damp mops, a fragrance of the forgotten. It was a stark, gray concrete box that hummed with the vibration of the building's massive HVAC system, located 30 floors beneath the cold luxury of Nathaniel's glass throne. I sat on a plastic crate, my 155-centimeter frame feeling smaller than ever, my 53-kilogram weight barely making a dent in the silence. I looked at my hands. In the harsh, flickering light of the single fluorescent bulb, my Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, looked like translucent parchment, the blue veins beneath the surface mapping out a lifetime of hardworking service. My Da Hon Hop Tien Dao, combination oily skin, was slick with the residue of 12 hours of labor, a fine sheen of exhaustion that Nathaniel would have called filth. Tonight, my work hadn't just been about buffing floors. It had been about a janitor's prayer. Not a prayer for mercy, but a vow of reckoning. I had spent the last 4 hours observing the invisible ones, the people my son considered light bulbs, to be unscrewed and discarded. I watched him berate a security guard, a man named Samuel, who had been with the building for 15 years, because Samuel's uniform had a microscopic tear in the sleeve. I watched him ignore the silver-haired woman, Maria, who was meticulously dusting the awards in the trophy case, awards he had won using the momentum of my life's blood. He moved through the hallways with delusions of power, his pinstriped suit acting as armor against the humanity of the people around him. He was so materialistic, so blinded by the cold luxury of his own making, that he didn't realize the very people he trampled were the ones holding the ladder he stood upon. So this is how they repay me? The thought was a rhythmic, low, slow throb in my chest. Did they really think I had become that senile? Did Nathaniel truly believe that because I had traded my silk blouse for a navy polyester uniform, my quiet wisdom had evaporated? I leaned my head back against the concrete wall, feeling the industrial heartbeat of the building. He thought he was the master of this machine. He didn't realize I was the one who owned the land it sat upon. I pulled a small, battered notebook from my pocket. In it, I had calculated the numbers. The lease for the 3 acres of red clay and scrub brush. The hidden asset Thomas and I had bought with our literal blood and sweat was set to expire in exactly 3 weeks. The legal truth was a cold, sharp blade. Without my signature on the renewal, Vance Enterprises didn't just lose their office. They lost their existence. Every night I mopped, I was performing a ritual. Each stroke of the mop was a signature on a different kind of contract. I was praying for the patience to wait for the right moment. I was praying for the strength in my sandpaper hands to hold the line when the clash finally came. I remembered the winter of 1998 again. I remembered the cold of the plasma center and the heat of the pharmaceutical vats. I had been self-sacrificing to a fault, believing that if I suffered enough, Nathaniel would never have to know the scent of ammonia. I had protected him so much that I had inadvertently raised a man who couldn't see the person standing in the shadows, but the shadows were where the truth lived. I stood up, my joints clicking in the humid sub-basement air. I didn't feel like employee 402. I felt like the earth itself, patient, silent, and absolutely immovable. I walked to the sink, washing the gray residue of the floor wax from my hands. My reflection in the cracked mirror was no longer haggard. It was clear-headed. It was sharp. I was moving from the sub-basement to my memory-filled room in my small apartment, where the deed to the land sat in a fireproof box beneath my bed. The spatial contrast was my fuel, from the sterile, unfeeling glass of the tower to the warm, honest wood of my own home. Nathaniel thinks he is the CEO of the future. He's about to find out that the future is owned by the woman who remembers the past. The strength of the foundation. We often mistake silence for absence. We think that because someone doesn't speak, they have nothing to say. We look at the people cleaning our offices, driving our buses, and cooking our food, and we see utilities instead of souls. My son's materialistic pride blinded him to the most basic law of the universe. Nothing stands without a foundation. He thought his foundation was his bank account, his Rolex, and his delusions of power. He forgot the dirt. He forgot the blood. True, quiet wisdom understands that dignity is not a title given by a board of directors. It is a quality of the spirit earned through the grit of survival. My sandpaper hands are more valuable than his polished ones, because mine have actually built something. Never apologize for being the invisible one. The person who holds the mop is often the only one who truly knows where the bodies are buried and who owns the ground they're buried in. The janitor's prayer is simple. Let the arrogant be humbled by the very earth they try to pave over, and soon, very soon, I will be the answer to that prayer. May 1st, 2026. The air in the executive suite of Vance Enterprises was no longer filled with the cold luxury of sandalwood and quiet confidence. It was thick with the ozone of panic. The lease for the 3 acres of red clay beneath the skyscraper was set to expire at midnight. For the first time in his career, my son Nathaniel was staring at a wall he couldn't climb with a pinstripe suit and a checkbook. I was there, of course. Employee 402 was always there. I was emptying the heavy brushed steel bins in the executive lounge, my 155-centimeter frame hunched, moving with the low, slow rhythm of a woman who had become part of the background noise. I watched through the double-paned glass as Nathaniel paced his office like a caged predator. He was screaming into his speakerphone, his face a mottled, ugly purple. "What do you mean the renewal was rejected?" he roared, his voice cracking with the first notes of a choking sorrow he didn't yet understand. The Margaret Vance Trust can't just say no. They're a faceless entity. Find out who the principal is. Offer them double, triple. I don't care if we have to auction the very soul of this company. Find Margaret Vance and get her signature by 5 p.m. He threw a heavy crystal paperweight across the room. It shattered against the mahogany door. I didn't flinch. I simply continued to wipe the coffee rings off a side table. "Maybe she just wants to be seen, sir," I said quietly, my voice a fragmented whisper. Nathaniel whirled around. He didn't see his mother. He didn't see the woman who had sold her plasma so he could have a life of glass. He saw a nuisance in navy polyester. "Shut up and keep moving, 402, he hissed, his eyes bulging with arrogant disdain. "Nobody asked for the janitor's opinion. You're lucky I don't fire you for trespassing in my line of sight. Get out." So this is how they repay me, I thought, the question finally hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. Did they really think I had become that senile? I pushed my cart out of the room, the squeak of the rubber wheels sounding like a countdown. Nathaniel had spent his morning auctioning off the dignity of his staff, his integrity and his history, just to save a lease he didn't realize I held. He was willing to pay anything to a stranger, yet he wouldn't give a kind word to the woman who gave him life. The ritual of transformation. I left the building through the service entrance, and the weight of the polyester uniform finally becoming unbearable. It felt like a shroud, a skin I had worn to witness my own erasure. I walked 2 blocks to the Grand Continental Hotel, where I had checked into a suite under the name of the trust. I began the ritual. I stripped off the navy blue polyester, the uniform of the invisible. I showered, the hot water washing away the scent of ammonia and the gray residue of the floor wax. I looked in the mirror, assessing my Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin. It was pale, yes, but no longer haggard. It was the face of a strategist. I carefully prepped my Da Han Hop Thien Dao, combination oily skin, applying a matte finish that smoothed over the lines of my 65 years. I reached for the charcoal gray suit I had purchased in Manhattan. The fabric was Italian silk and wool, and a texture of strategic intelligence. I stepped into it, the fit perfect, the silhouette sharp. My sandpaper hands, still rough but now meticulously clean, emerged from the sleeves with a strange, terrifying grace. I had my hair styled into a sharp, elegant bob, the silver strand shimmering like armor. I looked at my reflection. Margaret Vance was back. Not the mother, not the maid, but the landowner. I picked up the weathered leather briefcase. Inside sat the original deed from 1991, and the rejection notice I had signed as the principal of the trust. I may be old, Nathaniel, but I am not foolish, I whispered to the empty, luxurious room. You've forgotten who built this empire, and now you're about to find out who owns the ground beneath it. The walk of the principal. At 2 p.m., I walked back through the revolving glass doors of Vance Enterprises. The receptionist, the one with the silver nails who had once dismissed me as an outsider, looked up. She didn't ignore me this time. She couldn't. The aura of quiet wisdom and absolute authority radiating from me commanded the air in the lobby. I wasn't an outsider today. I was the atmosphere itself. I am here to see Nathaniel Vance, I said. My voice was no longer a fragmented whisper. It was firm, sharp, and decisive. Do you have an appointment, ma'am? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I am the principal of the Margaret Vance Trust, I replied, looking her directly in the eye. And your CEO is currently occupying my property without a lease. Tell him the landowner has arrived. Her face went ashen. She fumbled for the intercom, her movements frantic. As I waited, I looked at the chrome trash bin near the desk, the one where my beef stew had been thrown weeks ago. It was polished and empty, reflecting the world of cold luxury Nathaniel had built on a foundation of lies. He had auctioned his soul for this tower. Now it was time for the final bid. I stepped toward the executive elevator. The Act 7 of my life was closing, and the clash was beginning. The shedding of the mask. We often believe that our identity is fixed by the clothes we wear or the titles we hold. We think the world sees us as we are, but the world only sees the mask we provide. I spent 3 weeks wearing the mask of a utility, a ghost, a snail. And in that time, I learned more about the soul of my son than I had in 30 years of motherhood. True quiet wisdom understands that the most powerful transformation doesn't happen in the mirror, it happens in the spirit. When I took off that polyester uniform, I didn't just change my clothes. I shed the burden of my own self-sacrificing silence. I realized that my dignity was not something Nathaniel could grant or take away. It was something I had to reclaim with my own sandpaper hands. Nathaniel is about to learn that you cannot auction what you do not own. He sold his respect for his elders to buy a view of the sky, but the sky is a guest of the earth, and I am the earth. The elevator doors of the executive suite chimed, a cold, crystalline sound that felt like a bell tolling for the end of an era. As I stepped out into the 30th floor lobby, the plush gray carpet swallowed the sound of my heels. This was the same lobby where 48 hours ago I had knelt with a bucket of gray water, scrubbing the scuff marks left by men who didn't know my name. But today the navy polyester was gone. In its place was the charcoal gray silk wool suit, its lines sharp and unforgiving. My Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, was no longer sallow under the fluorescent hum of the sub-basement. It was luminous, reflecting the strategic intelligence of a woman who had spent 30 years playing the long game. My sandpaper hands, though still marked by the grit of the vats and the mops, gripped a weathered leather briefcase with a strength that made my knuckles turn white. The receptionist, the one with the silver nails who had dismissed me as an outsider, looked up. She started to give her rehearsed, dismissive smile, but it froze halfway across her face. She didn't see employee 402. She saw a ghost that had suddenly put on flesh and power. "I am Margaret Vance," I said. My voice was no longer a fragmented whisper. It was firm, sharp, and decisive, vibrating with the authority of the earth itself. "I am the principal of the Vance Trust. Your CEO is expecting the landowner." Her hand trembled as she reached for the intercom. "Sir, the principal is here. She's coming in now." I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked past her, the scent of my expensive, understated perfume cutting through the stagnant sandalwood air of the office. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to the director's office. The doors I had polished until my reflection cried. Nathaniel was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me. He looked like a king surveying a kingdom that was about to catch fire. He didn't turn around immediately. He wanted to project delusions of power, to make the faceless landlord wait for his attention. "I hope you're prepared to be reasonable, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dripping with a materialistic arrogance. "I've already authorized my legal team to double the previous lease rate. I don't have time for a sentimental auction of my soul. This building is a landmark of the city. It's my legacy. Let's sign the papers and get this over with. And I have a merger to close." He turned around then, a practiced predatory smirk on his face. The silence that followed was so absolute it felt physical, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Nathaniel's smirk didn't just fade, it disintegrated. His face went from a confident bronze to a sickly, mottled white. He looked at the charcoal suit. He looked at the silver bob. He looked at the eyes he had inherited, and then tried to erase. "Mom?" The word was small, a fragile, fragmented thing that tumbled out of his mouth like a broken toy. I didn't move. I stood in the center of his office, the very room where he had told the investors I was a snail that brought down the value of his corporate culture. I set the leather briefcase on his desk, the desk I had emptied the trash from just last night. "Did you really think I had become that senile, Nathaniel?" I asked. Every word was a hammer blow, delivered with a quiet wisdom that had been sharpened in the dark. "Did you truly believe that the woman who outmaneuvered the logistics unions in the 90s and survived the caustic fumes of the pharmaceutical vats wouldn't know how to protect her own soil? The maid, the cleaning job." He staggered back, hitting the glass window. "You were employee 402. You were cleaning my toilets while you held the lease to the land." "I wasn't just cleaning your toilets, Nathaniel," I said, stepping closer, my shadow falling over the lease documents on his desk. "I was auditing your soul. I wanted to see the man you became when you thought the woman who gave you life was just an outsider, bothering you for a handout. And I wanted to see if the pinstripes had managed to cover the heart I gave you. They didn't. They just replaced it with a ledger. Mom, I can explain the lobby thing. It was a high-stress day. The investors were watching. I had to maintain the image. The image is a guest on my property, Nathaniel, I interrupted. My tone as cold as the gray marble in the lobby. The aesthetic you worship is sitting on 3 acres of red clay that I bought with the blood you've spent your life pretending doesn't exist. You called me mediocrity. You called me an embarrassment. You said people are like light bulbs, disposable when they burn out. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the original deed from 1991, its edges yellowed, bearing the sandpaper smudge of my own thumbprint. I may be old, but I am not foolish, I said, was the signature dialogue final and absolute. You've forgotten who built this empire, and now you've forgotten that the utility you wanted to discard is the only person standing between you and the street. The turning point was complete. The hidden asset, the literal earth beneath his feet, was now the only reality that mattered. Nathaniel looked at the deed, then at me, and for the first time in 10 years, he looked like the small, frightened boy who used to cry when his shoes didn't have the right logo. But I wasn't the mother who sold her plasma today. I was the landowner, and the lease on his life was officially up for review. The weight of the Earth's success is a skyscraper, tall, glittering, and arrogant. But a skyscraper is a tenant of the ground. When we rise, we often develop delusions of power, thinking that our height makes us superior to the dirt. We forget that the dirt is where the roots are. My son thought he could erase his history by treating his mother like an outsider. He thought he could buy his way out of the ledger of blood. But dignity is not a commodity you can lease. It is a quality you earn through the grit of your character. I mopped his floors to see if he was worth the land he stood on. And as I looked at him cowering against the glass, I realized that a man who doesn't respect the invisible ones is a man who owns nothing at all. He wanted a meeting with the principal. Well, the principal has arrived, and she's brought the bill for 30 years of ungratefulness. The silence in the director's office was no longer the polite, expensive hush of a corporate sanctuary. It was the suffocating stillness of a tomb. Nathaniel stood paralyzed against the floor-to-ceiling glass, his reflection superimposed over the city he thought he conquered. His face, usually a mask of materialistic composure, was now a map of sheer, vibrating terror. I stood in the center of the plush Persian rug, the same rug I had vacuumed at 3 a.m. while he slept in his penthouse, and I didn't feel like a woman of 65. I felt like a mountain. My Da Trang Lan, fair, cool-toned skin, caught the afternoon sun looking sharp and regal, a stark contrast to the haggard shadow I had played for the last 3 weeks. My Da Hon, Hop Tien Dao, combination oily skin, was matte and perfectly set, reflecting the strategic intelligence of a woman who had planned every move of this siege. "Mom," he whispered again, the words sounding like a glitch in a high-speed processor. This isn't possible, the Vance Trust. It's a multi-million-dollar entity. You're a janitor. I am the person who owns the dirt beneath your shoes, Nathaniel, I said. My voice was no longer the fragmented murmur of employee 402. It was firm, sharp, and decisive. I tossed the leather briefcase onto his mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy thud that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the building. So this is how they repay me, I thought, looking at the son I had bled for. Did they really think I had become that senile? And did he truly believe that 30 years of self-sacrificing labor had turned my brain into the same gray mush he thought he was mopping up? I took that job because I wanted to see who you were when the lights went out, I continued, stepping closer. I was only 155 centimeters and 53 kilograms, a small woman by any measure. But in that moment, I occupied every cubic inch of that office. I wanted to see if the boy I raised had any of the quiet wisdom his father left behind. Instead, I found a man with delusions of power, who calls his own mother an outsider and tells his staff they are as disposable as light bulbs. "Mom, listen to me," Nathaniel stammered, stepping forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the pinstriped lapels of his suit. The merger, the investors, I had to project a certain image. It's business, you know business. So if they knew my mother was a laborer, they would have pulled out. I was protecting the legacy. The legacy, I barked a laugh that was as cold as the gray marble in the lobby. You've forgotten who built this empire, Nathaniel. You didn't build this. You just sat in the chair I provided. You're standing on 3 acres of land that I bought with the plasma from my veins and the skin from my hands. You think you're a king? You're a tenant, and your lease is up. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the lease renewal document. I didn't hand it to him. I held it up, the sunlight making the legal seals glow. I may be old, but I am not foolish, I said, my voice rising in a decisive crescendo. I watched you mock Samuel for a torn sleeve. I watched you ignore Maria as if she were a ghost. You've become disrespectful toward elders and the very people who keep your world spinning. You treat the invisible ones like trash because you've forgotten that you were once one of them. Mom, please, he begged, his materialistic armor finally cracking. He dropped into his executive chair, the throne I had polished with my sandpaper hands only hours ago. If you don't sign that, the board will oust me by morning. I'll lose the company. I'll lose everything I've worked for. Everything I worked for, I corrected him, my tone dropping to a deadly, quiet chill. You haven't worked a day in your life, Nathaniel. You've performed, you've postured, but you haven't worked. Work is what happens in the pharmaceutical vats at 4 a.m. Work is what happens when you're scrubbing a toilet, and the man who should love you calls you an outsider. I laid the contract on the desk, but I kept my pen in my pocket. My kindness was never a doormat for you to wipe your feet on, Nathaniel, I said, the finality of the sentence hanging in the air like a gavel. It was a bridge, and since you've decided to burn it, you shouldn't be surprised to find yourself standing on the wrong side of the river. I looked at his Rolex, then back at his face. The delusions of power were gone, replaced by the raw and naked fear of a man who realized he had no ground to stand on. Literally. I'm not signing this, I said. Nathaniel's breath hitched. What? Not yet, I added, my eyes narrowing with a strategic intelligence that made him flinch. If you want my signature, you're going to have to earn it. And you're going to start by learning the value of the floor you're sitting on. The clash was over. The signature of power was withheld, and for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Vance was going to find out what it felt like to be employee 402. The ledger of the signature. We often believe that power is something we hold in our hands, a pen, a checkbook, a title. But real power is the ability to walk away from the table when the people sitting at it have forgotten their manners. My son thought he was the architect of his own destiny. He forgot that every architect needs a site. He forgot that the most important signature in his life wasn't on a merger. It was on the deed to the dirt. True, quiet wisdom is knowing that the smallest person in the room is often the one holding the keys to the largest doors. I mopped his floor to see his soul, and I found it lacking. Now I will hold my signature until he finds a way to fill the void where his humanity used to be. The sound of Nathaniel's knees hitting the deep, plush Persian rug was the loudest thing I had heard in 30 years. It was a dull, heavy thud, the sound of a man losing the gravity that held his world together. He stayed there, his materialistic armor shattered, clutching the edge of his mahogany desk as if it were a life raft. His face, usually so composed and sharp, was a frantic mottled white. His cold white skin, fair, cool-toned skin, looking like wet paper under the afternoon sun. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice a fragmented wreck of the arrogance he had displayed only hours before. "If the board finds out, the lease is in jeopardy. If the investors see me like this, everything I've built is gone. The reputation, the stocks, the penthouse. I'll be nothing. I'll be an outsider." I stood over him, my 155-centimeter frame casting a long, dark shadow across his executive chair. I looked down at my sandpaper hands, the hands he had called an embarrassment, and I felt a cold, clear-headed power surging through me. The choking sorrow of the lobby, the pain of seeing my beef stew in the trash, it all distilled into a single firm and decisive moment of quiet wisdom. "So this is how you repay me?" I asked, my voice cutting through the sterile air of the office like a scalpel. "You're worried about being an outsider. You spent weeks treating the woman who gave you life like a utility to be managed. You looked at the people who keep this building standing, and you saw light bulbs to be unscrewed. You didn't build this empire, Nathaniel. You just sat on the throne I provided." "I'll do anything," he sobbed, his delusions of power completely evaporated. "I'll double the trust's payments. I'll put your name on the lobby wall. I'll buy you a mansion in the hills. Just sign the renewal. Please, Mom, don't destroy me." I walked around the desk and sat in his chair, the janitor's throne. It was cold leather and polished chrome, a seat of cold luxury that felt hollow compared to the warmth of the dirt it sat upon. I leaned back, looking at the city skyline he thought he owned. "I don't want your money, Nathaniel. I have more than you've ever bothered to count," I said, my voice rising in a gradual escalation of power. "And I don't want my name on a wall where the people inside don't know how to say thank you. If you want my signature on this lease, if you want to keep this glass tower from being reclaimed by the earth, you are going to learn the lesson I failed to teach you." I pulled the contract toward me, but I didn't reach for a pen. I reached for the strategic intelligence that had kept this land in my name through 3 decades of economic storms. "Here are my terms," I said, my tone sharp and absolute. "First, you will call a general assembly in the lobby. Not just the executives. I want the security guards, the secretaries, and the night shift. You will stand before them, every single one, and you will apologize. You will apologize for your disrespect toward elders, for your arrogance, and specifically to the cleaning staff you called mediocre. You will tell them that without their hands, your vision is nothing but a pile of dust. Nathaniel looked up, his eyes wide with horror. A public apology? In the lobby? I'll be a laughingstock. The board is sitting on my land, Nathaniel, I interrupted, and they can move their desks to the sidewalk if you don't find your humility. But that is only the beginning. I leaned forward, my Da Hon Hop Tien Dao combination oily, skin catching the light, making me look as immovable as a mountain. For the next 30 days, you will not be the CEO of Vance Enterprises. You will be employee 402B. You will report to Maria at 8 p.m. every night. You will wear the navy polyester uniform. You will scrub the toilets. You will buff the marble. And you will empty the trash bins of the men you think are your equals. You will learn the scent of ammonia until it is the only thing you can taste. You will learn proper manners by serving those you thought were invisible. Mom, you can't be serious, he gasped. 30 days as a janitor. I have a merger. I have meetings. Did you really think I had become that senile? I asked, the signature dialogue final and absolute. You will find the time, because if you miss a single shift, if you speak a single disrespectful word to a colleague in a blue uniform, I will walk into the county records office and I will end this lease. I will watch from my apartment as they take the V off the top of this building. I stood up, the signature moral line ready on my lips. I may be old, but I am not foolish, Nathaniel. You've forgotten who built this empire. And you've forgotten that my kindness was never a doormat for you to wipe your feet on. It was the soil. And today, I am taking the soil back until you learn how to walk on it with respect. I walked toward the door, my charcoal suit whispering against the air. I didn't look back at the man on the floor. I didn't need to. I had spent my life as a self-sacrificing shadow. But tonight, I was the only thing in the building with any real weight. I'll see you at 8 p.m., employee 402B, I said. Don't be late. Maria is a very strict supervisor. As I walked out, the spatial contrast felt like a victory lap. From the cold luxury of the office to the honest ringing sound of my heels on the marble lobby floor, I felt a sense of freedom that was 30 years overdue. I had reclaimed my son, not by giving him more, but by showing him what it felt like to have nothing but a mop and his own name. The seat of true power. We spend our lives chasing the throne, the corner office, the title, the bank account, believing that the higher we sit, the more power we have. But true power doesn't sit, it supports. It is found in the sandpaper hands that hold the world together, while the materialistic kings sleep. My son thought he was the master of the tower, but he was just a guest of the earth. I had to remind him that the most important seat in any building isn't the one behind the mahogany desk. It's the one where you sit to tie your work boots. Dignity isn't a gift you receive from a board of directors. It's a quality you earn through the hard-working grit of humility. Tonight, Nathaniel would learn that the floor he looked down upon was the only thing keeping him from falling forever. And as for me, I've never stood taller. The lobby of Vance Enterprises, usually a silent cathedral of cold luxury, was vibrating with an energy it had never known. At 8 p.m., the marble floors weren't just reflecting the overhead LEDs. They were reflecting the faces of nearly 300 people. I stood in the back, a small shadow of 155 centimeters and 53 kilograms, my charcoal suit blending into the darkness of the far corner. My cold white skin, fair, cool-toned skin, was pale but steady, and the Da Hon Hop Tien Dao combination oily sheen on my forehead was gone, replaced by the matte, cold resolve of a woman who had finally stepped out of the invisible role. In the center of the lobby, standing on a simple, unassuming wooden chair, was Nathaniel. The delusions of power that usually draped over him like a cape had been stripped away. He wasn't wearing his pinstriped armor, and he stood there in his undershirt and slacks, looking exposed and agonizingly human. Around him stood the ghosts, the security guards, the secretaries, the mailroom clerks, and the entire janitorial staff led by Maria. They didn't look at him with the usual fear. They looked at him with the unblinking heavy judgment of the hardworking class he had spent his life ignoring. I called you all here because I have a confession," Nathaniel began. His voice, once a booming instrument of materialistic authority, was now a fragmented wreck. It echoed off the glass walls, sounding thin and hollow. I have spent my life believing that the height of this building was a measure of my worth. I believed that because I sat at the top, I was superior to the people who kept the foundation clean. I watched Maria, her silver hair catching the light. She stood with her arms crossed, her sandpaper hands a testament to a life of service. She didn't look impressed. She looked like an auditor waiting for the final tally. "I was wrong," Nathaniel continued, his voice cracking. He looked toward the corner where I stood, but I didn't offer a smile. I offered nothing but the quiet wisdom of my silence. I treated my mother, the woman who owns the very ground we stand on, like an outsider. I called the cleaning staff mediocre. I told my associates that people are disposable light bulbs. A ripple of low murmurs moved through the crowd. The consequence of greed was finally manifesting, not as a loss of money, but as the total evaporation of his respect. He was being liquidated in the eyes of his peers. "As a condition of my continued tenure," Nathaniel said, his face flushing a deep, mottled red, "I will be stepping down as CEO for 30 days. I will be reporting to Maria. I will be wearing the uniform. I will be scrubbing the floors I once mocked." He stepped down from the chair. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. It was the sound of a kingdom being dismantled brick by brick. Maria stepped forward and handed him a navy blue polyester bundle, the same uniform I had worn as employee 402. Nathaniel took it with trembling hands. The materialistic pinstripes were gone. He was now employee 402B. "The locker room is in the sub-basement, Mr. Vance," Maria said, her voice firm and decisive. "Don't be late. Tish, we have 3 floors of restrooms to sanitize before midnight." I walked toward him as the crowd began to disperse. The executives fled toward the elevators, their eyes averted, but the invisible ones lingered, watching the fallen king. Nathaniel looked at me, the bundle of polyester clutched to his chest like a shield. "Mom, please, is this enough?" he whispered, a too-late apology hovering in his eyes. "Did you really think I had become that senile, Nathaniel?" I asked, my voice a sharp, clear bell in the quiet lobby. This isn't a performance, it's a reckoning. You've spent your life auctioning off your soul for the view from the top. Now you're going to spend a month learning the price of the floor. I reached out and touched the rough fabric of his new uniform. I may be old, but I am not foolish, I said, and the signature dialogue final and absolute. You've forgotten who built this empire, and you've forgotten that my kindness was never a doormat for you to wipe your feet on. It was the only thing keeping you from the cold. I watched him turn and walk toward the service stairs, not the executive elevator. I watched the CEO of Vance Enterprises disappear into the sub-basement to learn the scent of ammonia. The clash was over. The consequence had begun. I walked out of the revolving doors and into the cool April night. I didn't feel the choking sorrow anymore. I felt the freedom of the earth beneath my feet. I had been the invisible bloodline for 30 years, but tonight the blood had finally returned to the heart. Nathaniel would learn proper manners, or he would lose the ground he stood on. Either way, the landowner was finally at peace. The cost of the crown. We often think that the greatest punishment for greed is poverty, but for the arrogant, the greatest punishment is invisibility. To be the one who mops the floor, the one who is walked past, the one who is utility rather than a person. That is the true audit of the soul. My son thought he could buy his way out of the ledger of blood with more money. He didn't realize that the debt he owed wasn't financial. It was moral. Dignity isn't something you can lease. It's something you earn through the hardworking grit of humility. I had to strip him of his suit to see if there was a man left underneath. Tonight, as he scrubs the marble, he will finally understand that the most important signature in this building isn't on a merger. It's the one we leave on the hearts of those we treat with respect. The most beautiful sound in this multi-million-dollar glass tower isn't the chime of the executive elevator. It's the rhythmic wet slap of a mop hitting the marble at 3 a.m. It is May 30th, 2026. I am sitting in the high-backed leather chair of the CEO's office, my janitor's throne, watching the sun begin to bleed gold over the Connecticut skyline. My 155-centimeter frame, once hunched with the weight of being invisible, now feels anchored and immense. I weigh only 53 kilograms, but today my shadow covers every inch of this 3-acre plot. My Da Trong lawn, fair, cool-toned skin, is no longer sallow from the fluorescent hum of the sub-basement. It is clear, catching the first rays of a new horizon. Even the Da Han Hop Tien Dao, combination oily sheen on my brow, feels like a glow of victory rather than the sweat of exhaustion. Below me, in the lobby that once saw my beef stew thrown into a trash bin, my son is finishing his shift. Nathaniel didn't quit. When the 30 days of employee 402B were up, he didn't run back to his pinstripe suits and his materialistic delusions. Something in the scent of that ammonia, or perhaps the way Maria refused to call him sir until he earned it, cracked the glass shell of his ego. He still runs Vance Enterprises. I signed the lease renewal last week. But the V on the building stands for something different now. It stands for the hard-working bloodline he finally stopped trying to outrun. The consequence wasn't just his humiliation, it was his education. Nathaniel still works the night shift every second Tuesday of the month. He calls it his grounding. He mops the executive restrooms. He empties the bins. He looks the security guards in the eye and asks about their families, and he actually waits for the answer. He has learned that a leader who doesn't know the texture of the floor will eventually trip on it. A soft knock at the door breaks my reflection. Nathaniel enters. He isn't wearing the navy polyester tonight. He's back in a suit, but his sandpaper hands, yes, he has developed them now too, are tucked comfortably into his pockets. He doesn't stride in with delusions of power. He walks with the quiet wisdom of a man who knows he is a guest on his mother's land. "The lobby is buffed, Mom," he says, his voice firm and decisive, yet devoid of the old arrogance. "Maria gave me a satisfactory rating today. High praise coming from her." I smile, my rough fingers tracing the yellowed edges of the 1991 deed sitting on the desk. "Manners are a heavy tool to carry, Nathaniel. Are you tired?" "I'm the good kind of tired," he says, sitting across from me. He reaches out and places a Tupperware container on the desk. It's warm. It's beef stew. "I made this myself. No trash bins this time." I feel the choking sorrow of the past months finally dissolve into a profound sense of freedom. The turning point wasn't just about a lease or a legal document. It was about the reclamation of a soul. I had to be the invisible ghost to show him that the most important people in his life were the ones he chose not to see. The new horizon is not just for me. It's for every employee 402 in this building. The Vance Trust now mandates a living wage, full benefits, and a scholarship fund for the children of the maintenance staff. The light bulb fund, Nathaniel calls it, as a private joke between us that carries a sting of truth. We no longer discard people when they burn out. We give them the power to shine brighter. I stand up, my joints clicking with a rhythmic, healthy sound. I look at my son, and for the first time in a decade, I don't see a CEO. I see the boy I sold my plasma for, the boy who finally understands the cost of the blood. "I may be old, Nathaniel, but I am not foolish," I say, my voice a clear, ringing bell in the early morning light. "You've forgotten who built this empire, but you finally remembered who you are." I walk toward the door, leaving him in the office that sits on my soil. "My kindness was never a doormat for you to wipe your feet on," I say, pausing at the threshold for the final signature moral line. "It was the foundation, and as long as you respect the ground, you'll always have a place to stand." The ledger of the soul. We spend our lives building towers of cold luxury, believing that the higher we climb, the closer we are to God. We mistake our bank accounts for our worth and our titles for our identity. But the ultimate audit of a human life isn't found in a profit and loss statement. It is found in the way we treat those who can do absolutely nothing for us. My son thought he was the architect of his own destiny. He forgot that every architect is a tenant of the earth. I had to strip him of his delusions to show him that dignity isn't found in the pinstripes. It's found in the hardworking grit of service. If you find yourself being treated like an outsider in your own life, remember this: the people who look down on you are only able to do so because you are holding them up. You are the foundation. You are the invisible bloodline. And you have the power to step away and let their glass houses crumble. Or you can stay and teach them how to build something that actually lasts. I chose to stay. I chose to fight. And today, as I walk through my lobby, the invisible ones aren't ghosts anymore. They are the owners of the morning. And my son? He's the one holding the mop, finally learning how to walk with grace.